This is the Horse Radio Network.
This is episode 912 of Horse Tip Daily. A different horse tip, a different equine topic, a different equestrian expert every day. Horse Tip Daily brings the world of equine knowledge to you, one day at a time. Greetings, horse people. Coach Jen here, and thanks for tuning in to Horse Tip Daily. Today's tip is an excerpt from the weekly Horse Health Report on Horses in the Morning. The Hit'em crew is joined by Dr. Mark Renz from the University of Wisconsin to have a talk about weeds. And we'll get right to our tip after this shopping tip from EquestrianCollections.com.
Hi, Glenn here from the Horse Radio Network, and I have Debbie from Equestrian Collections back with me to talk about a product that I could really get into, a driving product for a change.
Yeah. Hi, Glenn. This week I'm going to talk about the Intrepid Wagon Master Driving Horse Blanket.
I didn't even know this existed, so I'm excited.
Yeah, it's a pretty unique product that they have made, and the company that has this is up in Amish country, and there's quite a few driving people up there. And what this blanket is designed for, it's not for while you're actually driving the horse. It's for when he is stopped. So they call it for hitching up, like if you were the Amish folks and they hitch up, then you can put this on. But, it's also good for if you're at a driving show or if wherever you are, there's a lot of standing around in driving.
Yes, there is, actually. You're right.
And then this is easy on and easy off, and you can keep your horse, been driving him, and he's a little warm. You can throw this on him. It's designed to be wicking. The thing goes over top of the harness, so there's a little bit of air allowed between the harness and the blanket, and it allows for all kinds of moisture wicking so that you're not going to have an overheated horse because you have a sheet on him. So it's really designed for that, which I thought was really unique. It has the two belly bands per single. It's an easy release.
And I see it's 360 grams of fill. This is one heavy blanket. This is meant to, for cold weather use.
Yes, it is, and especially meant for if you're working your horse in cold weather,
right? And
then you're not, and then you stop.
Well, and you gave a good example. The Amish do that; they'll park at a store and leave the horse out there for an hour. So,
and also carriage, the folks who have carriage driving.
Yep.
Businesses or taking to weddings.
Yeah,
a lot of people
good point.
have in my breed, a lot of our gypsies are used for driving, and a lot of people use them to drive people to their weddings. This is perfect for that because there's some standing around while you're waiting for them to come out and all that stuff. So this was such a unique product, and I think the driving sport is getting bigger and bigger, and I know in my breed it's huge. And it's only $76.95, so if you drive your horse, this is something that you should definitely look at having in your arsenal. And it comes in all the regular sizes. It measures. You measure just like you would, a regular horse blanket.
And that can be found at EquestrianCollections.com. The Wagon Master Driving Horse Blanket. Just search for Wagon Master, and I'm sure it'll come up. And if you are into driving and you're not listening to the driving radio show yet, you can find that at Horse Radio Network. I host that with Dr. Wendy Ying. So that's EquestrianCollections.com. Well, we have today with us assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which sounds really cold, and his name is Dr. Mark Renz. Good morning, Dr. Renz.
Good morning, and you're right, it is very cold up here.
I love it that Jennifer wrote here that you are a weed scientist. Do you call yourself a weed scientist?
I do, and it is kind of a unique position, and I get a lot of hassles.
I bet you do.
But I think it's a really is appropriate. I'm interested in studying plants that aren't supposed to be there, and that's what a weed is, and trying to develop and educate people on how to manage those plants so they don't cause problems. Like for horses, toxic, poisonous plants is a big concern, and that's one of the things that we work on.
All right, let's talk about hay and
getting
weeds
to
and
it. Yeah.
all that stuff. Now, I'm a horse husband, and one of the fears that we horse husbands have, especially when our wives are away, is we get this list of things that we're supposed to do. And one of the things we're supposed to do is feed hay. But now, not only are we supposed to feed hay, with our lack of training, we're also supposed to determine whether the hay is moldy, whether there's weeds in there that they shouldn't have, that kind of thing. So what am I supposed to look for?
Well, it's a challenge. And I think, one of the reasons it is such a challenge, and this is where I come off with full disclaimer, is I'm a plant person. So I love plants. I'm into plants, and I understand that. But are you a plant person? No. I'm guessing you're an animal person, right?
No, that's correct. Yes. Who has to actually feed plants to my animals? Yes. That's
right. And so there's just not a lot of knowledge that's out there. And plants are really unique creatures. They are very different than animals. But I think that, understanding in that hay, understanding just a few simple concepts can really help you understand, is this hay good? Is it not? And I've kind of come up with a list of 3 things that you should be kind of looking for.
Okay.
But, first off, I think the key point to realize is horses need decent quality forage, hay, but they don't need dairy quality forage, which is pure alfalfa most of the time. So I'm guessing most of your listeners and other people are feeding a mixture of legumes, which we call, that could be alfalfa or other clovers, with grass. Is that what you're feeding your animals?
Yeah, we actually don't even do the alfalfa mix with ours. I think Jamie does, but we don't do the alfalfa mix with ours only because we have 2 fat horses that would, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that the misconception a lot of people get is they need this ultra high dairy quality hay, and that's not the case. They need decent hay quality, pure grass, depending on the species of grass, can provide that, and a mixture of clovers or alfalfa and grass can do that very, very well. So here's my top 3 things that if you are feeding hay that you should be looking for. And you should feel good because you nailed the first one. You should not feed moldy hay to your animals. So that's a real simple step 1 to do. You
got something right, Glenn.
I did.
Something right, Glenn.
See,
Good
I learned
job.
something in 25 years.
And I think that's a real simple thing to do, because often those diseases that are causing that mold can produce material that can actually make your horses sick. And it's really dependent upon what that is, the plant that the mold's growing on, and the mold itself. Actually, if you ever heard of warfarin or coumarin, which is a blood thinner, that was actually discovered in Wisconsin from people that came to us with moldy hay. My mother is actually taking it right now. So it can actually thin the blood of your horses and cause all kinds of issues. So that's a real simple thing to do. As you're taking that bale of hay out and putting it in a feeder or spreading it on the ground, however you feed it, just be looking for some mold. If you see that mold, it's not a good thing to feed. Now, they can tolerate small amounts of it, but I would say if you're seeing it consistently through hay, that's a sign that you shouldn't be feeding your hay.
Okay.
Okay, so that's 1. 2, and this kind of gets at the whole concept of forage quality, particularly if you're feeding a lot of grasses, is you should be, as you're feeding that hay, be looking for forage, particularly those grasses, if they're mature. And what do I mean by that? Do they have seed heads present and seeds are kind of coming off in the hay? And so why should you be concerned about feeding mature forage? Well, as forage matures, those grasses, and if you're feeding alfalfa or clover mature, their forage quality goes down. And it goes down dramatically to where it's not really nearly as valuable as it typically would be. So if you're seeing a lot of seed heads on your grasses, that's probably an indication that that quality of that forage is low, and you're going to have to feed something else to your animals to make sure that they're nice and happy. So do you often see seed heads in your forage when you feed it or your hay?
We don't, but I do know what you're talking about. In the past, we've had that problem, and it's basically, and a lot of times that will happen on years when it's extra rainy, and the farmers haven't had a chance to get their hay in till late. When it actually goes to seed. And that's a lot of times when you'll see it is weather related and the farmers just haven't gotten to it.
Yep, and I think that's just reality of farming and them getting to it too. It's tough to get that stuff out of the fields in rainy years sometimes. So sometimes you don't have a lot to say, but if you're there looking at buying hay, and
it's
you've
not
got
bad
two
for
choices,
him. It's not bad for him. It just doesn't have the nutrient value that before it goes to seed.
You got it. Yep, that's absolutely right too. So lower nutrient qualities, you might have to supplement with something other with a little bit more protein in it, in particular too.
Okay.
But a lot of times that's out of our control. When you're buying that hay, that's the time to be looking for that. So that's number 2. And then the third one, which is, go ahead.
I'm sorry, can I ask a question about that real quick? So I've always wondered this. When I do throw the hay onto the pasture, like we have grass pastures, and I throw the hay and I see all the seeds come down, will those seeds germinate in my pasture? Or is it just, are they like toasted because they've already been dried?
No, in many cases, depending on the species, they will actually germinate in your pasture. So that's a really good question and a really good point. So if it's forage species like, say, red clover or something like that seed that's going down there, yeah, that could be a really good. But if it's a weed species like a foxtail or something you don't want, that's not such a good thing. So I think
I always thought it was like free grass seeds. Like, here you go, free grass. Planting it in my pasture.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think in some cases you can get some benefits. Grass seed is pretty cheap, though, in general, though. If you really want to improve your pasture, it's probably better to buy some grass seed
the right way.
Relying on the hay, because who knows what that is and what the quality of that seed is. But that's a great question. Great question.
All right, number 3.
Okay. So the third one is tends to be quite a bit harder, but really what it comes down to is inspecting that hay for 2 things. Weed species. So again, the definition of a weed is a plant you don't want growing there. So not that forage species that you want. And sometimes that can be really tough to identify, or an insect. And so usually when you see insects in your hay, that's usually a bad sign that there's something going wrong there too.
The other thing, I'm going to add another thing to that, and that's dead animals and snakes. Just throwing that in there because I've been down that road before. I hate opening a bale of hay and there's a dead snake in there. It's like, oh!
I've actually experienced that as well for a plant person, and that's actually a great third addition to there.
Yeah.
Now, weeds can be hard to identify too, and I think my recommendation is, what weed species are common in your area can vary dramatically. Check with your local county extension agent or your other representative, maybe who you're buying that hay from if you're going to a feed store, to ask what weeds you need to be worried about. A lot of your weeds, and if you guys have pastures, have seen it, actually are pretty desirable forage. Many of the broadleaf weeds like lamb's quarter, common ragweed, many of the horses will eat and have pretty good forage quality. There's just a handful usually in each region that we're really worried about, and those are generally because they're poisonous or toxic plants.
Right. Okay.
And really, the toxic plants, in the upper Midwest are going to be a lot different than Florida than out in the West. You can get online and see a top 10 list of poisonous plants for horse owners, and it's just going to be very regional specific, and so you need to be worry about that a little bit. One warning I will say, though, particularly for urban horse owners, is that many of our landscape plants tend to be very toxic to our horses. So don't be throwing clippings from your yard into your pasture, letting your animals feed on that unless you're certain that those aren't toxic plants.
You shouldn't be taking clippings from your yard and feeding it to your horse anyway. It's not good for your horse to begin with. But one of the things that, I've opened up hay bales before and seen black leaves, and that really jump out at you. Is the color, color things like that, is that something that could be completely harmless and it's just, after it died to turn black? Or is it something I should be, aware of?
Well, so usually what that is that's actually a disease that's turned it black, and it's probably an indication that when they harvested it and put it in that bale of hay, it was wet, it was too wet, and so that's some mold or some other type of a fungus. And some of those funguses can be totally harmless, and some can be toxic at certain levels. And so again, use the rule of thumb of if there's just a little bit of it here and there, I wouldn't worry about it. But if you're seeing, it really common in 10 or 20%, that's probably something you don't want to be feeding to your animals. You should get it checked out.
What's the most common weed that is a problem for horses that horses will eat and is a problem? Is there one that really stands out?
Well, again, it's pretty regionally specific, but I think foxtails are a really good example. We have several foxtail species. You go to a different part of the region of the U.S., and there'll be a different foxtails. But foxtails can be a problem because they have low quality, so they're not really good quality. And one of the other issues that they have is they have low palatability, so the horses don't like to eat it, and so they won't use that whole bale of hay. And then the third issue is if they have seed heads present, they can actually get pricked in the eyes, and we can get an increase in incidence of things like pink eye and things like that too. So that's a real common one that I would be concerned about, just because of those multitude of issues. But really, it's specific to the region. So if you're in Florida versus you're in the Midwest or out west, it's going to be a whole different slew of species you need to watch out for.
We have a problem with oleander, not in the hay, but a lot of people have oleander plants out here, and they're pretty common. And I had heard that one or two leaves could kill a horse. Is that true?
That is absolutely correct. And one of the problems with oleander is the animals like to eat it. Even cows and besides horses will preferentially eat it. And so that's really a concern that you should be aware of, is some of these ornamental plants, and that's why we just recommend not even feeding on it. Red maple is an example out in the Midwest that we are concerned about. Again, remember with toxic plants, it depends on how much of that toxic compound is in the plant. So things like oleander, 1 to 2 leaves, those are ones we really need to be careful about. We have this tree species called box elder, and there's some other species that they have to eat 10 or 20 pounds of it to get sick. And so understanding how much they can tolerate is really, really important.
So do you have a website there for the University of Wisconsin that people can find resources, or do you have a website that you would recommend?
Yeah, we have a couple of websites. I think probably the best website in Wisconsin to do is if they just get in their Google or whatever their web browser and search for just Wisconsin Weed Science. They can get to my website pretty easily. And then if they have some concerns, we actually have a group called Team Forage that looks at forage issues and has lots of information on animals, and particularly horses and forage issues. So they can look at that website as well. So those are probably the two options, and any internet browser and search engine should pop them up real easily.
Very good. Well, thank you for joining us today, Dr. Mark Rentz, Assistant Professor at the University of Wisconsin, the weed scientist. I love that. I would have that.
Thank you very much.
I would have that really big on my card if I was a weed scientist.
Well, there you go. If you want to listen to more tips on all sorts of topics for horse folks, you can stop by horsetipdaily.com and click on the topics drop-down menu on the left. And if you love listening to the Horses in the Morning gang putting in their 2 cents on all things horse, you can tune in every weekday at horsesinthemorning.com for fascinating interviews, news stories from around the world, clever contests, and general horsey hijinks. You can have all of your Horse Radio Network shows with you wherever you go with our new free app for iPhone and Android. Just go to your app store and search for Horse Radio Network. And don't forget to support our sponsors here on Horse Tip Daily, because they really do make this podcast possible. Today's podcast has been brought to you through the generous support of EquestrianCollections.com. The Horse Radio Network and the Horse Radio Network hosts are not responsible for statements of guests or their opinions. Use your own judgment when listening to the tips provided by the experts on Horse Tip Daily.